Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Brilliant Metrics webinar. Today we are talking about maximizing ROI on a limited marketing budget. It is that time of year where we are working to finalize our budgets and or figure out how to deal with the budget that was handed to us. I'm excited to... Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another
Hold on,
Brilliant
we got
Metrics
echoes going on.
webinar. Today we are talking about maximizing... Okay. My apologies there. The live stream was playing back at me. Okay. So we're talking about maximizing ROI on a limited marketing budget. Couple of quick housekeeping items. This is being recorded. You will get a link to the recording. You will also get a copy of the slides. If you are coming in on the live stream, there will be a QR code at the end you can scan to get a copy of the slides. If you're coming in on the Zoom, we have your email address. We will send the slides to you. You don't need to request them. A little bit about me. My name is Steve Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO here at Brilliant Metrics. Prior to my role here, I was actually a software developer, so I love geeking out about marketing technology. But the last 10, 15 years have been spent really in the marketing strategy arena. I do a fair amount of public speaking, run workshops, mentor startups, and this is my happy place. So I'm excited to be here. Brilliant Metrics, we are a B2B strategic marketing agency. We take a more strategic, pragmatic approach to marketing than a lot of other agencies. And along with that, we are what our clients usually rely on us for is to provide that clarity or that structure, the scaffolding for high performing marketing programs, in addition to the support on the execution side. If that's of interest to you, please do reach out. All right, shameless plug aside, we've got a fair amount of ground to cover today. I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible and try and keep this webinar to about 30 minutes. If I do run over, I apologize. We're going to talk a little bit about tipping points because it really plays into when we look at return on investment in marketing. Tipping points are a really important component of that. Once we get through that, we'll go through the 6 actionable steps that you were promised in all of the marketing materials for this webinar about how you can maximize the ROI on your marketing programs and campaigns. All right, so when I say tipping point, marketing operates on tipping points. You can think of it like snow on a mountain. Every single engagement or impression that you create with your brand adds a snowflake to the mountain. But it's only after they build up to a certain point do you actually get any results. So, to extend the analogy, you're not going to get that avalanche of business unless you hit that critical mass of engagement with an audience. Let's talk through 3 specific examples of these tipping points. The first one is frequency. If you've been in marketing or sales for a while, you'll hear the rule of 7 battered around. It's from a guy by the name of Jeffrey Lant. And he threw out there that it takes 7 touches with a brand before somebody will consider buying your product or service. Now, I want to say up front, this is actually bunk. That's junk science. There's no actual science to this rule of 7. There's never been a study done to validate it. There have been lots of studies on frequency, and they sort of validate this in spirit. The reality is it's a lot more complicated, but if you just need a basic premise to operate on, you can think that your audience in general needs to see your brand about 15 times or about 7 to 15 times before they're going to recall it on demand when they need your product or service. There's recency associated with that too. If it's been too long since they've seen or heard from your brand, it won't work either. Long story short, if you take the same amount of resources and spread them out over a really big audience, you'll never get enough of that repeated touch point with each member of that audience to move the needle. You'll touch all of them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and it won't be enough for them to actually consider you when they are in market. So there's a tipping point that's hit when you cross whether it's 7 or another number, a number of times of impressions and engagements with the brand and the product and the service before you will be the vendor of choice. The second tipping point that we see come up is in algorithms. Algorithms are awesome. One of the reasons why we love Facebook, even though it's not considered a true B2B platform, is because it has the best algorithm on the planet for pattern matching your prospects against all of their, behavior patterns that they generally engage in online. Algorithms, however, need a certain threshold of data to work. So if you're running search ads, if you're running Facebook ads, if you're running programmatic ads, and they're algorithmically optimized, if you don't hit the tipping point in investment for a given audience, it will fail. Now, that tipping point isn't huge. It's not a huge number of dollars. Where we see brands run into trouble is when they're trying to run programmatic or Facebook or search ads against this set of keywords or this audience, and this set of keywords in this audience, and this set of keywords in this audience, and they've spread their budget too thin across all these different places, and now none of them have the sufficient data for the algorithm to do its job. The more investment, the more data, the better the algorithm can dial you in. The more dialed in you are, the better the results you get, and the higher the returns on that same investment. The third tipping point is a little bit more abstract. In car races, there's something called pole position, and it is the position that you start in the race. Or the pole position is the first position in the race. Generally, it's the best position. It is the position where you are basically in position to win if nothing else changes throughout the course of that race. In marketing, your prospect has a brand or service in mind for a given problem or job, right? They have a problem, they're going to think of some brand first. That brand is in pole position. It is their race to lose with that prospect as that prospect goes through their buyer's journey. If you are the brand in pole position with your prospects, you are going to net way more opportunities than the brand in the number 2 or the number 3 slot. It's similar to that first position in Google for organic search. That first position gets something like 3 times as many clicks as the number 2 position. No different in sales. So if you put a whole bunch of resources out there just to get to number 2, you're only going to get 1/3 the result of if you just incrementally pushed a little bit further to get to that first position in the prospect's mind. There are lots of tipping points in marketing. There are lots of different ways we're under-investing by just a tiny bit too much for a given audience will net you 1/3, 1/2, 1/4 the results. And if you just go 10% more, you can double, triple, quadruple the results. So with that said, don't spread your resources too thin. This doesn't mean you need to spend more money. It just means you need to narrow the focus of where you're putting those dollars to make sure that you're hitting the tipping points to produce the results you need to produce. There are 6 ways you can focus those resources. The first one I want to talk about is strategic focus. What kind of marketing program are you running? Before I dive into that, I want to talk a little bit about leverage. In marketing, there are 3 forms of leverage that we see come up time and time again. The first one we call center of influence leverage. So you can sell to a person. You can market to a person. That person then buys your product or service, right? Your marketing effort to that person needs to cost significantly less than what they pay for the product or service they buy from you. Generally in the neighborhood of 10% or less. You get 1 sale out of that marketing investment. But you can also market to people who then spread the word of your brand, product, or service to others. Those individuals are called centers of influence. And if you market to them, your marketing dollars are now amplified by the however many dollars in sales or number of sales that individual can instigate on your behalf. So you get leverage when you don't influence the buyer, but instead influence the people who can impact multiple sales. And those include individuals like your dealers and reps and distributors, right? But they also include strategic partners, referral sources, other influencers in the market. If you can market to those individuals, you're going to have significantly greater leverage. The second form of leverage comes in dialing in your accounts to your ideal customer profile. When you market outside your ideal customer profile, those deals, let's say you get a lead and you get that lead in, that lead is going to be at a lesser dollar amount than your ideal customer profile. It will be less likely to close. It may churn faster after the sale. It may take longer to close. All of those things reduce the return on your investment. So if you want to maximize your leverage and maximize the return on your investment, dial in your targeting to focus exclusively on an ideal customer profile. Focusing your efforts on the right account fit is a form of leverage. And the last one is the one that's kind of obvious, but surprisingly doesn't get talked about as much as it should. And that is deal size. If you are the type of organization that can go after slower, larger enterprise deals or go after smaller, faster small and medium business SMB deals, oftentimes the higher ROI is in the slower, larger enterprise deals. Because essentially, for every zero you add to the deal size, that's a zero you can add to the marketing budget to support the deal. And so you get leverage in the size of organization you're targeting in B2B. Okay, so with those three forms of leverage in mind, we will prioritize with our clients the strategies or approaches to marketing generally in this order. With channel being the first priority, marketing to existing channel partners, making sure that our client's brand is top of mind with those existing channel partners. They could be referral partners, they could be dealers, distributors, reps, it could be other influencers in the market. But the more they have the awareness and top of mind awareness of our client, the more likely they are to recommend them. And we have run studies where we can get easily get increases of 20, 30, 50% in sales based on just influencing the channel. The second area that we'll focus, if it's appropriate for a client, is to actually increase the number of those channel partners, increase the number of those individuals who are referring business, who are specifying our clients, who are selling to our clients. If we can add additional value-added resellers, we will. And so that's a lead generation program, but it's running against the channel, not against direct leads. It's adding channel partners. It's adding referral sources. The third is account-based marketing, where you're picking your targets. And this uses that leverage of that ideal customer profile. If you're picking the targets instead of the targets picking you, you're only going to market to those that really match that ideal customer profile. And those are generally going to be larger. They're going to be perfect fits. So they're going to close faster. They're going to close more frequently. And they're going to be less likely to churn. If ABM is already in play and we have more budget, or ABM and channel lead gen aren't an option and channel isn't an option, then we'll look at enterprise lead generation, generating leads of enterprise sales. Because the dollar amount is higher, the ROI will be higher. The only time that will fall away as not being the next place to go is if the client needs revenue now, because those enterprise deals will take longer to close. And then finally, last on the list is SMB, or small business, small and medium business lead generation. And that's last because it has the least leverage. So prioritize your budget into the strategy or strategies that have the most leverage and are appropriate for your organization, starting from the top and working down. and make sure you fully fund each strategy before adding the next one. Don't try to spread yourself too thin, or they won't. None of them will work, right? Because you won't hit the tipping points. Okay. After strategic focus, the next thing we're going to get in the nitty-gritty, the tactics of each strategy and clarifying the objectives behind those tactics. Most marketing revolves around content of some sort. That content could be an event, that content could be a white paper, that content could be a blog post, it could just be a brand advertisement. But there is something there for your audience to read, look at, watch, participate in, etc. For each type of content, there's an objective and metrics associated with it. And if there's one thing I can emphasize to improve the ROI on your limited budget is to make sure that every piece of content that you produce or every experience you create for your prospect, that it has one clear objective and that you're measuring it against that one clear objective. So specifically, if I'm running brand advertisement, my objective is really to position the brand and to aid in recall of the brand, right? If I'm running content and my goal is to get engagement, this is content that isn't necessarily on the critical path to purchase. This is content that adds value and adds engagement with the brand for my audience, but maybe doesn't necessarily inform or persuade my audience to buy. Here, my goal is to create a positive experience with the brand, get them to spend time and thought with the brand, and in the meantime, position the brand as a thought leader in the space, ideally, or at least emphasize the brand position. If I'm running content and my goal is to influence that sale, here I want to influence or rationalize a sale because often sales, even in B2B, are emotional decisions. And our goal as marketers isn't so much to influence it as it is to give that person the backing. Should they be asked, why did you choose this vendor? They can answer the question. If I'm running lead magnets, my goal is to identify those individuals, get their names and email addresses into our database, and ideally in my marketing automation platform or whatever platform, drop a cookie on their browser so I can track their activity on our website. And then finally, we get down to the direct offers or the products themselves. And as I'm marketing those, I'm either looking for leads for a sales team or I'm looking for literal sales in the case of e-commerce or self-service type of sales opportunities. Everything should fit neatly in one of these buckets and should have one goal. When you try to produce a piece or produce an offer or an ad or a social media post and you try to blend these, you end up doing multiple things poorly instead of doing one thing well. You also have the problem of how to measure it. So if I want to measure brand ads, I'm really focused on just reach and frequency. Am I getting in front of my audience on a regular basis? Am I reaching my audience? And am I doing it ideally hitting that 7 times in a given period? If I'm trying to create experiences where people can either learn and influence their buy, I'm influencing their buying decision, or if I'm just trying to create a good experience with the brand, I'm really looking at what we call soft conversions internally. But these are they engaging with the content? Are they watching the video to the end? Are they scrolling on the page? Are they downloading the PDF? Are they doing the things that indicate that they're digging into that content, not that they just hit the page and bounced? Lead magnets, I'm looking at form fills. And finally, offers and products. Here, I'm looking at sales accepted leads or some measure of lead quantity and quality, or I'm literally looking at sales revenue, depending on how short that sales cycle is. In any case, as you're producing your content, take a critical eye. Take a critical eye to what you ran, what you produced in 2024, and see, is there anything that was trying to do multiple of these things? Was there stuff that we were producing and promoting that didn't do any of these things? And trim it. Focus your attention on the items that support one of these goals and make sure that that item is optimized to fulfill on that one goal. Okay, the next step, maximizing evergreen. If you are currently constantly producing new content, a newsletter every single week or month, and there's always new social posts and always new blog posts and always new. There's a cost associated with that. And the shelf life of all of that content and that email newsletter and those social posts can be relatively short. And then you have to go produce the next thing. One way you can maximize the return on your investment in 2025 is to flip your content production mindset towards evergreen content. So evergreen content is content that doesn't have much of a shelf life on it. Granted, that blog post will have stats that fall out of date, or it might not play perfectly in light of some new world event or something along those lines. You will need to update your content, but your goal is to produce content that should run for at least a year or two before it's not applicable. The pros, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of the same piece. If instead of producing a blog post that's very timely to the latest news, engaging in what used to be called newsjacking, right? You're producing a blog post that will stand the test of time, will educate, entertain, and inform your audience, regardless of whether it's December or March or July, regardless of whether it's 2024, 2025, or maybe even 2026, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of that content. The other thing is you can start to build that marketing machine. If you build up 12, 15, 20 pieces of content and can rotate and cycle through them, now the next time you go to add to that, you can actually increase the frequency with which you're pushing content out to your audience. And I'm talking in vague terms because this could be organic social, this can be email, this can be paid media, but you want to basically run your best hits, evaluate the performance of that content, and if it performed well, leave it in the rotation. If it didn't, get rid of it. There are some cons to this, though. The biggest one is that, news works. There's a reason why we have newspapers and news shows, and people are glued to CNN and they're glued to Fox News and New York Times and whatever else, is because news is novel and it's interesting and our brains are wired to want news. You lose that when you run evergreen content. It will hurt the performance of your marketing program to some extent, but you'll make up for it in the return on investment that you'll get out of each piece you do produce. Second, not everything can be evergreen. If I'm announcing a webinar or I have a major corporate announcement, that's going to have to be off cycle from the rest of the evergreen content. And I'm going to have to push that out as a one-off thing. But for stuff that can be evergreen, push it to be evergreen. And finally, as we learned in 2020, evergreen content can fail in times of massive change. When the pandemic hit, we basically had to go kill all of the evergreen content we were running with our clients. Now we've been able to bring that back in recent years. Most of it stood the test of time in a post-pandemic world. But for a period of time there, we couldn't run some of that content. It just didn't make sense in the current world events. If your industry or the world comes across another period of massive change, you may have to pause your evergreen content for a period of time and produce new stuff that is relevant. It happens. Still, I firmly believe moving to evergreen content is one of the highest ROI activities you can engage in 2025 if you're currently constantly on the hamster wheel of new content, new content, new content. All right, next up, let's talk about how you're targeting your content and your media. Oops. There are two types of audiences. We call them closed and open audiences. And when we talk about closed audiences, these are well-defined groups of individuals where you can reach everybody inside that audience. So if I want to retarget the visitors to my website, I can afford to effectively reach everybody who's hit my website and retarget them with an offer, with some media, with some content. It's a relatively small audience. If I want to reach my followers on social media, that's a relatively small audience. If I want to send an email to my email list. That's a small, relatively well-defined audience, and it costs nothing to send the email. It costs something to produce it, but I can reach that audience without any budget issues. If I upload a CRM list and market to that CRM list on Facebook or on another platform, that's a closed to well-defined audience, and I can afford to reach everybody in that audience. They're built using first-party data. Retargeting is first-party cookie data. CRM targeting is first-party CRM data. My email list is first-party data. This is data that I've collected that I'm using to target this marketing. These are usually pre-qualified individuals. They did something to get on my list. They did something to visit my website and get retargeted. They took some action that pre-qualifies them, so they're of higher quality. They're of inherent quality, I should say, than what I would get if I went outside of these audiences. And they've probably at least heard of my brand. They didn't get on my email list without having heard of my brand. They didn't visit my website without having heard of my brand, right? So there's a higher value to this audience there because they already know who I am. I just need to convince them to buy. Contrast that with open audiences. These are audiences that are too large to reach everyone. So if I go into Facebook and I dial in, or I go into LinkedIn and I dial in my ideal customer profile, chances are it's a pretty big audience if I'm looking nationally. Now, if you're local marketing, it's a little different. Sometimes you don't really have much of an open audience. But if the entire country or continent or globe is your market, it's really easy to end up with an audience that's too big to hit that tipping point of, and we'll just use 7 as the number, 7 touches in a short period of time in order to influence that buyer. So open audiences are too large. Because of that, they often rely on an algorithm or a certain degree of timeliness to prioritize that targeting. So when I use Facebook or when I use LinkedIn, the algorithm is going to go find the people that look like the ones that have engaged with my offer. That's great, because otherwise I wouldn't have enough money, enough budget to hit all of those people multiple times. They often rely on broad demographics or third-party intent signals. I'm not setting up this targeting with my own personal data. I'm dialing in certain job titles or companies or group memberships or other things like that that are signals to this audience, or I'm building a lookalike off an audience that I already have, right? But it's using third-party data in order to build this audience. If I'm doing contextual targeting, it's based on a third-party signal of the content that that person's looking at. You want to cut the open audiences first. You're going to get much higher ROI from your marketing activities that are hitting the closed audiences. And so you'll want to make sure the closed audiences are fully funded and the open audiences is the place where you can pull back on budget. Now, what will happen naturally is over time, your closed audiences will actually get smaller, freeing up budget for you to target the open audiences. There will be fewer people on your website to retarget. Your followers in Facebook and LinkedIn will start to drop off. You won't have as many people in the fold to nurture. In the orbit framework, we call these people in orbit. You won't have as many people in orbit to nurture because you aren't feeding it with the open audiences. The open audiences feed the closed audiences. But if you have to cut the open audiences first. The next step in optimizing your ROI comes into narrowing your audience. I'm going to come back to this slide here where we talked about forms of leverage and account fit being a major form of leverage here. You have an ideal customer profile. When you market to that ideal customer profile, those deals are more likely to close. They're going to close at a larger dollar amount. They're going to close faster. They're going to be less likely to churn. But here's the thing. Pretty much every company I've ever worked with isn't ideal enough in their ideal customer profile. Their ICP just isn't dialed in nearly to where it should be. And what happens when your ICP is too broad? When you say, well, we can work with companies even if they're a little bit bigger than that or a little bit smaller than that. So let's broaden the size of the company. Or we can work with companies that are in these adjacent industries. So let's include those in our ICP. We don't want to leave these companies on the table. We're leaving business on the table if we don't target them as well. Every time you do that, more of your messaging fails to resonate, or you've got to make your messaging so broad to hit everybody in the ICP that it doesn't resonate with anyone. Your deals are less likely to close because they aren't people that are perfect for your company. And you've just made your audience that much bigger, spreading your resources that much thinner. So chances are you have an ideal customer profile and it's not ideal enough. It's just a customer profile. So take a critical look to who you're targeting in your marketing and your advertising and try to dial that in to just those accounts that are perfect for your organization, that are almost guaranteed to close if we can get them in pipeline. And they're going to stick with you for forever. The last topic is prioritizing the individual tactics that you're running. If you remember this chart, we had a metric for everything. Only if it had one defined use case, right? Only if it had one objective. But if it had one objective, we could assign a metric to know whether it's succeeding in that objective. The best way to go and bounce one tactic or one piece of content or one channel against another one is to use cost per whatever the metric for success is. So if it's reach and frequency, it's cost per individuals reached at the desired frequency, or cost per thousand impressions, or CPM. If it is soft conversions, it's cost per soft conversion. If it is form fills, it's cost per form fill. If it is sales accepted leads, it's cost per sales accepted lead. Whatever the desired result is of that particular offer, piece of content, ad, webinar, workshop, whatever it might be, go and evaluate its merits based on a cost per metric. And you will quickly understand what's working for you and what's not. Bonus points if you can work the labor, the internal labor into that cost per, right? This should be a net cost per amount. That gets hard to do, especially if you've got agencies and subcontractors and other people involved. But if you can estimate what that net cost per is for each one of your tactics within your marketing program, and you've clearly defined what your desired outcome is for a given set of content within that tactic, you can figure out what's the wheat and what's the chaff and get your pull back on the stuff that's just waste. And you'll end up running a significantly higher ROI marketing program. And so with that, I'm just going to quickly recap. The 6 steps to maximize ROI is strategic focus. Run the type or types of marketing programs that are going to have the highest leverage first, starting with channel, moving into ABM. If ABM isn't a fit, move into enterprise. If enterprise isn't a fit, move into your SMB lead generation. Second, clarify objectives behind every single bit of content or offer or ad that you're pushing out. What is it trying to do so you can then measure it later against its merits? Third, maximize evergreen. If you're running newsletters and you're constantly on the hamster wheel of producing more and more and more content, stop. Produce content that'll stand the test of at least a couple of years and rerun it. Third, prioritize your targets. If you're doing a mixture of open and closed, especially in paid media, dial back the open if you need to save some bucks. You can do that for at least a while, if not indefinitely, as long as you continue to feed that closed audience. If you stop feeding the closed audience, guess what? You've freed up budget now for the open audience. Narrow your audience. I can pretty well guarantee your ideal customer profile is not ideal enough. Dial it in. You'll close more deals for less dollars. And then finally, evaluate the performance of your tactics using cost per metrics tied back to those metrics for success based on the objectives of everything you're running. If you do these 6 steps, you can produce more with less resources, guaranteed. With that, this isn't the type of webinar that will evoke a ton of questions, but if you have one, please pop it into chat. Otherwise, I invite you to choose your own adventure here. The QR code on the left will let you follow us on LinkedIn if you aren't already. That'll get you more opportunities to learn. Meet with me. If you have a question that you think is more one-on-one, go ahead and scan that middle QR code and schedule some time to meet with me one-on-one. I'd love to dig into your unique situation and see if there's an opportunity for me to share some advice or a resource, or maybe help you out as an agency. And then finally, if you're coming in a live stream only, request slides or recording on the right-hand side. With that, I would just double check that we don't have anything on the Zoom. Okay. With that, I hope everybody has a wonderful day. I appreciate you spending this 36 minutes with me today, and we'll see you next time. We're off, no webinar in December, so I will see you in January for our next webinar. Have a great day.